Brian's job now is work.
And Bob is our president, so maybe you'll say a few words, then I'll talk about the conference and some other things.
I guess I'd like to start this evening by talking just a few minutes about SoftTech and what we're about and why we exist and what we do. SoftTech has been around, as Brian said, for 29 years. To put this in perspective, Jeff over there at one of the early SoftTech events in about 1994 had a revolutionary concept that businesses might have more than one email address. This is the rebel that forecasted the future. But that literally is how long we've been around. And so this evening, we'd like to talk about a couple different programs that we work with and support. And Lindsay over here will talk about the coding. So Lindsay, if you'd like to step up here and tell us a little bit about the coding groups that she's the community creator for the coding group within SoftTech.
Yes, so my name is Lindsay Erickson, and I started a local meetup group called Slow County Coders. So if anybody knows any local engineers or coders of any sorts, whether they're brand new or they've been around for forever, feel free to send them our way. I had moved to the area recently and didn't know any other engineers, so I thought I would start the group, and now we've got a nice little group of friends that get together 2 or 3 times a month. So feel free to join us or send anybody else our way. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to SoftTech for sponsoring it.
What was the name of the group?
Slow County Coders. And I've got some stickers if anybody would like
Are
it.
you guys on Meetup?
Yes.
We are, but we should add a link to on the website to the meetup to make it easy.
Yes, but first we should give Lindsay. We want to talk about a couple other groups that we are involved with, and Brian has been involved in the writing community for longer than he'll admit to, and I'd like to have him talk a little bit about what's coming up in the Writers Conference in San Luis Obispo.
Yes, the Creators Conference. I'd like to rename it to the Central Coast Creators Conference, but they won't let me do that yet. This is my first year as the director. This is the 39th year of the Central Coast Writers Conference. But as we all know, the form of content has been evolved way beyond just book. So I want to attract this year content creators of all types: podcasters, YouTubers, influencers, podcasters. I mentioned that. Any form of content, of course, writers as well. But SoftTech stepped up to be one of our sponsors this year. I'm very grateful. They actually have 5 scholarships. So we'll be talking about giving away some scholarships to people to attend. It's October 14th. It's out at Cuesta College. It's a one-day event. We have 16 panels, expert panels. I'm bringing in people like Thad to talk about AI. And I'm really excited because I got to pick a lot of the programs. I've been in publishing for 15 years, and I can tell you that with AI, publishing has never had a disruption like we are experiencing right now. It basically is putting the power of becoming an author, a good author, in the hands of anyone. Like the barrier to entry to be an author has essentially gone away. Yeah, we'll have that. And we are currently seeking sponsors. So by July 1st, if you're interested, and I've got some cards and you get me information, if you step up to be a sponsor, your logo will go into a mailer that's going out to over 40,000 SLO County residents. So we're sending out the brochure for the conference, and it's a great way to get some exposure. So SoftTech will have their logo in there. So Create is one of our sponsors as well. You can maybe mention something about them. They're going to have a live demo for the entire conference, so you can check out their screenwriting software. But that's the Central Coast Writers Conference.
Okay. Next, I'd like to highlight a problem that our industry has. And I don't know if everybody here is conscious of it, but we have a women's problem. We have a low participation of women in the technology industry. And I'd like to introduce an individual who is building a community in that space to talk about the Women Making Waves and their mentor network process, because it is SoftTech moments in the making. Tyler, could you take a few minutes?
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Tyler Skinner, and I'm the founder. I'm losing my voice, so please bear with me. I'm Tyler Skinner. I'm the founder of Women Making Waves, and we are a community dedicated to help women build confidence, competence, and true connections. We offer that by a variety of things: retreats, programming, online workshops, And we're not bound by any boundaries in the digital world. So our mentorship program is called The Next Wave. And when we saw the CDC report of 57% of young people in the US feeling persistent hopelessness, and a large portion of that being women, we answered the call. So we're really focused on young women, the next generation of female leaders, to learn to lead from a place of trust and within, matchmaking them with mentors across the country, diverse females from all over, all types of backgrounds, entrepreneurship, CEOs, everything in between, and really working on various components. SoftTech has been amazing and supporter, sponsor of that. And Bob, I think I will quote you by saying that women are just an underrepresented asset in a lot of companies and spaces and organizations. So we thank you for doing that. Please come see me. We are looking for more sponsorships to help women get into the program, community partnerships, and always mentors and mentees. So please come talk to me when you get a chance. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it.
Well, before we kick off the panel, I would like to kind of introduce SoftTech, because while a lot of people recognize the name, maybe not everybody realizes what we think our mission is in the community. SoftTech exists for the purpose of creating a SoftTech moments. SoftTech moments are when individuals in our community connect with each other, and we believe that the strength of our community comes from those connections. So what we try to do as an organization is hold events that drag makers, marketers, and managers, just like those 3 buttons over there, out of their caves and try to connect them within the community, because you need those 3 different components in order to build an enterprise within the global competition that exists today. And so SoftTech, again, has been around for 29 years. We have done a number of different initiatives that you would probably recognize. The Technology Park at Cal Poly, the Hot House, the CEO Roundtables, the women's groups, including one that goes before even Tyler's group. And so we've had these different initiatives, but our core value, our core thing is to connect people in the community. So I'd like to see a show of hands. How many people at tonight's event have met someone or reintroduced themselves to someone they've already known in the area? Okay, I claim a bunch of SoftTech moments. I'd like to kind of pivot away from talking about SoftTech and talk about the expert panel, because we have a number of people that we'd like to have introduce themselves, and then we're going to take some questions. But what we did in this event is look for putting together a panel of diverse opinions and perspectives on the issue of artificial intelligence. And so we have someone who's representing the ethics issues that are involved in this. We have an individual somewhere out here in the ether. Well, Steve Burgess is going to be looking at representing deepfakes. He's in the forensics business, and so he's engaged as an expert witness on validating information from computer systems. We have a person who's using it within the industry. And then the 4th panelist is this group. We all have our perspectives. We all see what's going on in this area, and we want to talk about, what do we see? So as a community, what are the opportunities this creates? I look back at this, and having been involved in SoftTech since 1996, when the internet was brand new and people were talking about, gee, should we have 2 email addresses or not? To today, we've seen this evolution time after time after time. So this is yet another generation of what's happening in the technology industry. And technology is no longer an industry. Technology is now a utility. You cannot run a business, a legitimate business, without a technology strategy. So while we started as an industry group, we are today an entrepreneurial group for the utility that is technology as we know it. I'd like to give Deb is out there. I'd like to give each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their perspective on AI.
Sure, I'll go first. Thank you very much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here remotely, and I'm mostly looking forward to hearing from all of you, so I will try and keep this brief. My name is Deb Donig. I am a professor of English literature at Cal Poly, and I think intuitively, some of you might be scratching your heads and saying, well, why is a professor of English literature talking to me about AI today? What's the and to that question, which I get very frequently, I like to say that before we can build anything, we first have to imagine it. And the process of imagining is the process of thinking about what kind of world we want to build, what kind of world we're trying to build build toward. And our process, particularly of building AI, a technology that uses data from the past, mass amounts of information that we cull from past experiences and past behaviors, and tries to use that behavior to understand the present, and oftentimes to predict or project that data into the future to try and either develop certain behaviors or inhibit them, or to build out the dimensionality of our world, fundamentally ought to consider how we imagine. What kinds of AIs do we want to allow? What kinds of worlds do we want to build toward? These are the questions I think we should ask ourselves. And so when I bring together the idea of speculation and building, and not just speculation in terms of a kind of science fiction attitude, which certainly is part of my purview, but also speculation in terms of things like market forecastings, in terms of thinking about what we want to invest in terms of thinking about the incentive structures that develop certain AI technologies and the technologies themselves. Again, AI is a predictive technology. I really want to think about the kind of fundamental values that we as humans hold and the diversity of those values, because it matters what kinds of values we want to build toward. And it matters whose voices we include in the imagining process. Of course, there are many values that I myself hold and that I hope we can build toward. But I also want to acknowledge and understand that there are a diversity of values that populate this world, and that we want to consider including as many voices as possible so that we get the robust sensibility about whose voices and what kinds of values and what kinds of worlds we think we want to usher into being. So that's a brief introduction, just as a couple of other points about myself. In addition to teaching at Cal Poly in the context of ethics and technology, I have a background in human rights. I run the initiative on ethics and technology at Cal Poly. Out of that, I host the Technically Human podcast, a show about ethics and technology, where I convene writers and thinkers and critics and leaders in the tech space, academics and industry, to try and constellate the discourse and try to understand the robust sense of all of the issues we want to consider, all the voices we want to consider in that focus. In addition to that, I also teach in the School of Information at Berkeley. I teach a school on data science and values. And right now, I'm particularly interested in developing an approach of ethics and also of imaginative ethics in the context of data science projections. Thank you all very much for hosting me today, and really excited to hear your thoughts and questions.
That would be at the central.
Sorry there, you cut out for a second, but happy to respond to any questions.
All right, we're gonna start here the panel shortly. All right, Thad. Sorry. Over to you.
I'm up next, am I? Okay.
Yes, Thad.
Good. In some ways, I compliment, I think, Deb's presence in that I'm taking the words that she's encouraging people to create and the experiences that they're sharing. And I'm on the publishing side of things. What happens when an author comes to a publisher with their creative output, and what's the role of AI going to be down the road? I mean, of course, because we're involved in publishing, we're very interested in AI and authoring, but that's not my primary focus. My primary focus is for publishing companies what is AI going to do that changes the way that books are produced, from editorial right through to the final printed or digital books, and what kind of new formats is this going to encourage, and what's it going to do in terms of trying to create a melding of media. We see a lot of opportunities for an intersection with non-print media because of some of the amazing technologies that AI, is bringing to bear. And also, we're also very excited because of the Apple Vision Pro announcement last week, which we think is also going to have a really interesting intersection point between what's going on in AI and what's going on in creative expression. That's just a sort of opening of my background. I've been doing this for 40 plus years, working with book publishers, specifically on technology. So I've run publishing companies, I've written a number of books, but my focus is primarily at the intersection of technology and the process of book publishing.
Thank you, Zach. Maybe you can just get up and look at the camera. That's just
Actually, if you're here locally, we'd like you to come up and talk from here. And if you have questions as we go around the room, we'd like you to get up out of your chair, walk to the center so that we get a good recording of it. And we also have some control over the interview.
Yes, it is. Well, thanks, Bob. Thanks, SoftTech, for putting this all on. I'm Kevin Judge. I run a local agency around here, a creative media agency called Creative Judge. We do everything from video, virtual reality, photography, a lot of asset creation. So we empower a lot of businesses to up their game visually or interactively. That's not a word, but you got what I'm saying. But with that said, where I started with all this was just a maker. I started back in high school playing around using torrent sites to rip free editing programs. I'm sure a few of you have done that too. And just playing with it, and creating new ideas and innovating. And I'm excited about this. I run a creative business, so it is impacting me from all sides, audio, video, photo, it's all affecting us, but I'm excited by it. It brings me back to being in high school and just thinking about the ideas we would come up with, and you would just run at it and realize, okay, I don't have any of the crew or technology or wherewithal to make any of these ideas that I came up with. But now you can a lot of these kids coming into it are going to be able to use these tools to amplify their ideas and innovations to levels that will get them recognized and will discover a lot of people. Now, there are a lot of potential fears of mine too? Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of services that I used to charge for that people can already create in seconds with, Midjourney, with Runway, their last update in the last week, making text to video actually a thing now. It's looking pretty good. These things are only going to come by miles and then the next few weeks, months, years, and it is going to affect all of our businesses. But I'm excited by that. I'm looking forward to the output that we can do because of that and the creativity that's going to come from that. So yeah, sorry.
The last member of the panel are the people in the room. We're all experiencing the same process. We're seeing the same evolution in different perspectives from different businesses. And I guess I'd like to, kind of kick it off and have people ask questions, because I don't think there's anybody who has the answer. I don't think chat has the answer. I don't think Firefly has the answer, or any of these other products that are out there. What they have are challenges that they can address. And I guess what I'd like to do is encourage the audience to ask questions. There aren't really any experts in a field that hasn't really existed long enough for an expert to happen. Now, that doesn't mean that AI is brand new. I can go back to the early 80s and saw neural networks running on an IBM System 38 and an AS400 and did development in it, way back then, which is the basic technology running in chat, but taken to a whole new level. And so, I guess I'd like to see what kind of questions people have. The whole purpose of this is to create a community dialogue that maybe will expose an opportunity that people in this community can take advantage of.
Sit down, Bob.
I can't sit down on the floor because I'd never be able to get back up. But anyway, anybody have a question they'd like to have the experts or people within the group? Please step up. I do want you to get up. I imagine it's a lot of physical activity. Get all the way out of that chair, but
It's great. You're the commentator. I feel more comfortable with him standing, actually. Okay. So are there checks and balances? Is there a conscious human at the other end of everything created with AI, or is it being set in place to where everything created has an ethical, conscious human saying, that's helpful and useful, or that's insulting or not good? You know what I mean? Checks and balances by a human.
okay. Deb, I think that's right.
Is anybody writing about this in law or anything like that?
Please step up.
Like how when you go to ChatGPT or whatever, you put in, even I've been working with like my 6th grade daughter, where I'm trying to train her, like you need to look at the output and you need to understand, like, does it sound like you? Is it accurate? Is it good paragraph structure? Like, how much longer is it going to be where AI is like the assistant, and how much better is it going to get? And then like, where does that like, can we really control this technology? So like, how do we create a system where truly that human can bring to bear what our cognitive abilities have, which is different than what like computational technology does, the way we learn, the way we process visual information, emotional, and all of these things. It's like, how do we create a system that's very dynamic and leads to better outcomes versus something that I think we're all like afraid of, right? It's like Dave, like, what do you think you're saying? I know.
I think I'd like to ask Deb to kind of step into this one because it's kind of in that ethics category. Is she out there?
Sure, absolutely. So let me say that this is a very multifaceted question, and I'll just try and take parts of it, and happy to follow up on any parts that I miss out on there. The first part I would say is I want to honor and give credit to the people who have really influenced my thinking on this, particularly Cathy O'Neil, whose book Weapons of Math, MATH, Destruction, I think really comprehensively tries to think about and understand the implications of AI systems that automate things like, for example, teacher evaluations, ratings for loans, all sorts of ways in which automation gets put into a kind of judgment system by which individuals are subject to the judgments of that automated decision, and the kinds of asymmetries between the individual and their ability to challenge those systems and the systems themselves. O'Neil, I think, writes very powerfully about, for example, the individual who gets assessed for a loan and the algorithm, which is opaque, which has a mathematical equation that individual is not subject to or able to change or see the kind of calculations that create the output, is then, for example, denied a certain loan. And certainly those forms of decision making have mathematical basis in them that we know is steeped in, for example, all forms of bias, historical bias that intersects with race, that intersects with geographical privilege. And so I think that in those contexts, we should absolutely insist not on simply the algorithms being fair and transparent, but also the opportunity for individuals to challenge whatever outcome they are presented with in terms of that equation and that mathematical process. Currently, that is not in place. I think that that's essential and necessary in order to pursue forms of equity. Now, when it comes to ChatGPT, the knowledge on that and large language models and GPT technology, I think, is a little bit limited simply because the technology and its circulation is somewhat new. there is not a lot of, I think, evidence-based research to determine whether or not these technologies will have an impact on, for example, knowledge circulation or power circulation about that knowledge. I think that I could make some projections and some predictions. Of course, they say in journalism that predictions are the scourge of journalism, and prognostication, I would say, equally is the scourge of scholarship. So I would hesitate before making any claims about what these technologies will do. I would wait to see what the evidence-based outcome of research tells us that they are doing. I would say that there's some things that I would want to be cautious about. The first is that ChatGPT as a technology currently bases its predictive text output on the information available widely on the internet. This is good in the sense that it has access to lots of information, but as we say in data science, garbage in, garbage out. There's a lot of garbage on the internet. And certainly the internet is not subject to a fair and equitable representation of human voices. It is vastly overpopulated by Western, by white, and by male speakers and textual authorship. And so we can expect that whatever ChatGPT feeds out based on that is going to carry and insist on the same kinds of biases. So I think that there are a couple of things that I am encouraged about. The first is that the government, and in particular, the dimension of the government that has to do with government contracts, is increasingly interested in questions of equity. My expectation and my hunch is that we're going to see government contracts build into them stipulations about, for example, what kinds of requirements in terms of equity, in terms of fairness, and in terms of transparency, a company may need in order to get a government contract. I think that that's very important. We're seeing new regulation and
I'd like to kind of move the
move
the conversation around, and a lot of people like to participate.
Yeah.
And everybody, we're trying to get it.
What she's saying. Don't shut her up.
Okay, I won't. I will not.
If I may, I'll add one last paragraph of thought, and then I'll turn the mic over. The last paragraph of thought I would just say is that there's a lot of encouraging work that I see emerging to combat that. I would be cautious around the incentive structures around tech, and in particular around AI technologies. And there's a lot that I have to say as well in terms of what we haven't talked about yet, which is what this will do to authors and what this may do to the process and the value of writing itself in our economy and in our value system.
I have one little counterpoint on to what Deb's saying. I agree with everything she's saying. But my sort of take on it, because I'm concerned at the level of alarmness, let's say, that's going on right now. Deb, for example, says that, we don't know if these systems are going to be fair and transparent. I think we know they're not, but we also know my perspective on it is it's not fair and transparent now. It's not currently fair and transparent. And so that doesn't justify, implementing an AI system that lacks fairness and transparency, but it's only by way of saying, in terms of the apocalyptic side of AI, that I try and talk people down from that and say, yes, these concerns are real. Yes, they need to be evaluated and taken seriously, but it's not this huge step up. It's not a rogue technology that's going to take over the world and, end everything without us having a voice to speak up on it. I think that we're coming off a corrupt and failed system. We've added a degree of automation to the corruption and the failure of the system, but it's not going to, change the world overnight. I don't see the imminent apocalypse from the AI technology.
Other opinions?
I think that AI is also a good way also to get through some bias that's out there. So AI for president is a little extreme, but I do think our next president should be using AI before they make decisions to help them come up with a bigger scale and a little more intelligence, because I don't think our politicians are unbiased by any means. And I do think AI is a lot less biased because they don't have any skin in the game in the sense that they're not trying to win people's votes. They're going to tell us the truth in some cases that a human being would never take sides with. So I just think that AI can be a very good way to balance out some of the policies that are being.
Different biases. It brings different biases.
It takes all the biases and comes up with an
Please step
intelligent.
up and you got a
So,
good point to make.
good
Go
evening,
ahead.
folks. I'm Joanne Miller. Okay, I'm Joanne Miller. And back in 1967, I was about to graduate with a degree in mathematics with an intention to go into computer science. I'm an old lady. And I was told, well, you know, that's being a programmer is probably good for 5 years, because by then AI will have taken over the world and all you would have to do is say, I want to do X, and X would appear. I want to do Y, and Y would appear. Well, let me tell you, I've had a really wonderful technology-based career and an investment-based career on technology. And just chill, folks, because the biases are, they may be different biases, but the biases are there because this is a biased society. And you, as was said by Deb, you look at who is putting in the input to the internet. You look at who is taking out the input, and then you look at who are making the decisions. This is a problematic situation. We just need to chill a little bit.
I think the one extra point I would add to that is we did a wonderful job of controlling the internet when it came out and social media when it came out. And I'm kind of expecting the same output. But anyway,
Delete.
other questions?
Shouldn't there be a difference between using AI in a technical way versus AI in a social way? Meaning the pursuit of some problem solving in technology or achieving some goal in medicine versus publications and transmitting ideas that, okay, they're ideas.
No, that's
I-
really valid, separating, delineating. That's all I have to say.
I would take that as a vote of confidence.
You're talking about like, well, there's benefits, like, even when I think about something as basic as like having to compose something, like sometimes I will use AI technology now, so it's a tool in my toolkit to get a different perspective on it. And ultimately I'll be the editor, but like, it's valuable to bring a different perspective on a problem that I hadn't had before. So there are definitely trade-offs, but ultimately, you know, keeping a human in the loop, but again, like creating situations where we're using technology for all the skills and abilities it brings, and then the human mind and all our like vast cognitive abilities in a way that's very seamless.
Do you give AI a conscience and a heart? How do you give our system at large a conscience and a heart or so?
Please.
So in my business, we're using a lot of different AI products right now in a lot of different ways. Using from ChatGPT to come up with descriptions of things that just save time or give you a different outlook on how you can describe something in a creative way. Sometimes you very too close to a project and you start, you're writing it from your point of view, but not from the point of view of your audience, of someone who's going to consume this content. And sometimes just putting an input of like the details of your project will spit out something that is something you yourself would not have thought of to use. So there's some aspects where we're using it just as a tool to give us a different perspective, or taking it back to like the Photoshop era, like the jump between like editing in camera to editing, or reel to reel to editing, like in a non-linear editing program. This is all visual, so this might not relate to everyone, but was huge. And there's so many automations that went into like Premiere and After Effects and Photoshop and all these programs that we take for granted now, where you click one button and it does a series of different things to create an effect that years ago you would have to do a lot more complicated procedures to do, whether it's like tracking a camera and then creating an alpha mat and solving for all this stuff. Like there's so much that went into these things that now you one click button and it takes 8 hours, days worth of work down to seconds. And so in that sense, I don't see there being a need for like a soul to this technology. It's a tool in that sense. But then there's other aspects of this where it's being utilized to write contracts or to create new things. A lot more text models versus visual models are being used in these ways that can influence human development and influence our direction with technology and innovation and all this stuff, because it is a very powerful tool that I don't think humans are really ready for quite yet, because it is very biased depending on which model you're using. But there's also so many models and they're all used for different things that we're just like in the foundation of this, trying to figure out where this fits into our lives. And there's a lot of fear in that. And some of it is valid, that automation is going to replace jobs for sure. It has in every industry, and it is going to replace it in my industry for sure. Visual effects, it's already happening. Like I said, it's taking hours out of my day, and that's money that I could be paying employees. But it's also it's also enabling us to do a lot more, a lot quickly, a lot faster, and in ways we wouldn't necessarily think of before. So.
Yeah.
So I work in machine learning infrastructure at Google. So I'm not going to talk about anything that Google does because I'm absolutely not allowed to do that. But in general, I just want to say that from my perspective, there's like a real opportunity to create unbiased models, because it all depends on what training sets we use. So yeah, ChatGPT uses all of the internet and it has a lot of garbage. So they create a ton of filters to filter out everything that's bad. But basically, every time there's something bad, one human has to come in and say, hey, we don't want that. That goes in the filter. But you can, if you give it a data set that is good to start with. So let's say, if you want something that's going to make decisions in an unbiased way, you can give it a bunch of like data and decisions. I don't know, but like if it's like, you're giving a mortgage, giving like, credit stuff. I don't know about any of that, but you can give it the data, the decision, give it a good set of data, and then you're actually going to create something that is powerful, that can make an unbiased decision a lot better than any human would, because even if they had all the data, they would still have their inherent bias. So, yeah.
I'd like to tell a horror story that I heard about AI, and I don't know whether this is a legitimate story or not. So it's very difficult to validate some of this stuff. And I understand that ChatGPT was used by a group to develop a dialogue to cultivate children in a pedophile group. And this is the kind of danger that we have to be careful of. This, and there are good things and there are bad things. And AI, to me, when I look at it, it's a tool, but it can be used for any number of different purposes. So I think we do have to have control over what goes on in that process. I think the concerns people are raising are very legitimate. Same.
For jobs, if you use it in a way that hasn't brought up, like, are you a lawyer? Are you an accountant? Are you a coder? Like, I'd like to hear how other people are using it outside of the novelty of it. Because Kevin uses it for his core business. But how else I'll give you an example. My wife likes to have bedtime stories, and I'm having it write bedtime stories, and it's very specific. I said, write a bedtime story about Morro Bay, and it wrote a bedtime story that included Morro Rock, sea otters, the elephant seal, all the things that are in Morro Bay. And I read it to her, and she's like, that's like the best thing I've heard. Like the quality of the work that it spit out for something that she could listen to before she goes to bed. I had her write a bedtime story about a frog. Like, it's such a effective tool. So I would say, as from a publishing standpoint, and in fact, I brought this up at the panel at the conference we were at, where I see the biggest risk or fear for the publishers is that why would you go buy a book on any topic if you can have ChatGPT write the exact book on the exact topic that you want? I think this is going to annihilate the traditional publishing industry, at least in the but beyond nonfiction, we're talking even creatively,
if you want to write a story for your daughter and you know that she loves all these different things, she will be in love with that story and she'll want you to read that story over and over. And then you can use Midjourney to create art, which has her involved in the art. So I think that that's going to become the product in the world of content for people who traditionally go to books. So that to me is the biggest risk that publishing has, is that ChatGPT is going to become the product itself.
You look like you're dying to say something. Please step up.
Writing aspect, why I was kind of shaking my head, is because I think for fiction, great, but I'm a lawyer by training. I'm not a lawyer in practice. I'm a skeptic. So I question everything, including whether or not this is truly artificial intelligence, or these are just large language models, predictive text, stochastic parrot. We can talk all about that. But in listening to that, a nonfiction book written by ChatGPT, I'm not there yet. We heard about the lawyer who took ChatGPT into court and it made up court cases. And one of the biggest things, and I realize we can put the filters in, and ChatGPT 4 is much better, and we should not be getting pedophile ring information from ChatGPT 4, hopefully. But I am very skeptical of using it in that fiction, in the nonfiction realm, because yes, I put that information in, but unlike Google, when I use it to search, where did it come from? How do I know it didn't make it up?
Use it to fact check now. You know
I'm
that?
gonna use it to fact check now, and yeah.
But I can assure you that it makes stuff up.
But it definitely.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. So and like I said, I'm curious about everybody here, whether this is, because I think there's kind of that two sides of, is this artificial intelligence?
No.
Or large language models, predictive text, truly artificial intelligence? Or is it, just like I said, it's predictive text. It's very powerful, but I'm, like I said, the skeptic in me, I question everything.
As we all should.
I think there's certainly
Please step up.
that warrant a non-human narrative voice behind it, like how to fix a bicycle from 1975, or a model. So we're already using the Google for all that stuff already, and just creating a body of writing about that is one tool AI can be used for. But when you have nonfiction that needs the narrative voice and the conscience and the heart, that's where a human can go, yes, a chat GPT for this and no for that. So that's what we were talking about with Deb, is who's gonna write the definition of all that? The definition of that rule or law, that's all being created right now as we run into problems. So we're basically going trial and error at the whole thing right now, which is why some people are scared. It's all still in that beginning.
Don't you accept some kind of responsibility as a human being that interfaces with a technology that presents information to you to validate the information at some point or level that in fact it's accurate, as opposed to I just printed it out and I'm done. The human interface has to be there, and you're going to be as good as your background being able to.
Please step up.
I feel like operations in our states will be like, yes, here's a agent, and you're talking with this customer service agent, right? We've all been on that. This is a customer service agent. I'm chat. Oh, this is a bot. Okay, hopefully, I agree. We should ensure that what we are repeating, because we learned it on the internet, is from a valid source. Hopefully, what we presented with. Is it?
Yeah, so validating those sources become more complex once the information is presented to you. And do you take it as God's Bible, or do you question it and try to?
Like academic training, like you get undergrad or even at community college or whatever, it's like, what are your sources? Do you have the primary source? Have you objectively evaluated all of this? Like, this is critical training in this day and age. Like, you know, it came out during the internet. It's like, is this a good source or is this crap? Like, even more going to be important for many different professions to be able to understand the quality of the information and where it came from. And that's why
So the validation becomes someone talking to their neighbors or in a community and saying, this is what was returned to me. And what do you think? Does this make sense? Or so perhaps
depending on the information you're talking about, if it's about like a local like legislation or maybe your community is like body of like.
We have another voice here. You want to?
To the point, the Department of Education has put forth the recommendations, and the recommendations are very AI taught. We also want it taught with thinking skills. So as they, you know, as that comes from the different communities and schools, and then kind of adjust to that. I think that the citations and the references and actual research is the critical part of incorporating the classroom.
Well, and the people we're gonna be impacted most by are the young people. We need the young people's input because you see a lot of old people in here, older people. And I will say. The register, whereas a kid can't do a basic math. He has to get out a calculator, figure out the deal, do 55 cents change. I think the problem with the education system is that these kids are going to use this as a crutch to the extent where they don't, they can't function without ChatGPT because there's.
They already can't socialize because of their phones.
And I'd like to make one other point. Not everything on the internet is truthful. Does anyone know that? The basis of this unreferenced product output. There's no reference in the chat that tells you where it came from, what sources it came from, whether you believe the discipline of those particular sources. And so that's really a problem when you unravel this.
Can we
Please,
address the elephant in the room?
only if you stand up.
I don't even know where to start, but who's to say what's fake news and real news and what's been censored and what hasn't?
And
I think we should all put our phones down and go, what's really going on? We're all being heavily manipulated and pitted against each other, which is what totalitarian regimes do before they usher in something called socialism and it turns into communism. Okay, I'm done.
Okay. Back here.
And the topic we're all touching on is traditionally epistemology, which is the study of how do we know what we know.
If people don't come to the microphone, we can't hear them from remotely.
You guys really want to hear your opinion.
So what, this is the topic that we're talking on is the intersection of tech with a traditional philosophical area, which is epistemology, which is the study of how do we know what we know. For example, anything you take. I mean, I assume that gravity is going to hold me to the earth, but how do I know that? If you read any of the philosophers, they go really into the weeds on this, but what we're talking about with how do we verify any type of information that we read on the internet, we're touching the topic of how do we know what we know. And when that intersects with technology, it's a whole can of worms. But I did kind of want to frame that that's kind of the topic everyone's dancing around and trying to chew on is how do we know what we know? And there's historically a lot of different speakers on that, but that's kind of all I have to add.
Okay. That's good.
Yes, sir.
The question is visual, so use Photoshop.
Please step up.
Okay. Well, I wanna bring out these visuals, how we believe what we see. Usually we would trust more what we see in a picture than when you read text. And with this new technology, I mean, Hollywood and filmmaking for 10 years, they have mastered to produce movies. They're completely realistic to watch, but they're all composed and all made. And now this becomes a tool for everybody. Everybody of us can now this using it. Download the new Photoshop and you can make up a picture by text and say, when I have a tree in there, or have a change a face, change a person out there.
You mean like a bomb exploding outside the Pentagon?
No, for example,
A recent
this
piece. Yeah.
we use. So the question for me is, in what direction we as a species wanna go? We wanna report reality and look at reality as humans, or we wanna to look at what's made up and what we make all up. And the new Google Apple glasses, they will show us this in 3D.
It's like Ready Player One.
Yeah.
With the more
Right.
advanced world. One over here, Bob.
So.
How about up here? You don't have to go to the gym after this.
Yeah.
There's a question posed earlier about how you use it in work and
Real world.
real world. And I'm a developer, mostly by background. And when it all was coming along, it was like, hey, I had some lawyer friends are like, we have all this case text. Can you make it understand and read and ingest this case text? And, you know, through the different GitHub repositories and whatnot, sure enough, you can point it at gigabytes on gigabytes of case text. And instead of having to hire a lot of paralegals to search and maybe find answers and whatnot, great, good feedback. They've been able to use it to help others that are less fortunate, that can't afford 1,000 different paralegals to research case after case or text or evidence would be part of it, right? And they can really move that needle for at a lower price. So that's been some of my experience. Been great. Recently, and this is what I want to pose to the group here, and I'm like, this is interesting. It comes down to, can this be used to help combat's not the right word, improve loneliness. Loneliness, I think we've heard is like a major effector for especially for the elderly. My mom's in a nursing home, although she's very social. So
I mean,
what
like
about that?
Brian. Like Brian.
Exactly. You get out more, Brian, right? So yeah. So that, and then also with homelessness. So the group that approached me with this was like, would it be possible to create like an agent on a phone or something like that? You could normally text with, oh, this is my buddy, this is my best buddy. Made me think of that movie Her, and there's been movies that have kind of referenced this. And this goes probably toward, I should look this way, towards ethics. If, say, in the future, those that are lonely or you'd meet them and say, wow, oh yeah, I'm having a great day, versus, yeah, you know, they kind of I got a few buddies. Or maybe some of those that are homeless or struggling with different problems, they're able to bring themselves up, and you wonder, like, well, there currently is not enough what is it, public servants, not caregivers to help those that are
AI the caregiver.
caregivers to help those that are struggling with certain addictions or whatnot. They could actually supplement or augment this with really high quality, either high quality friendships for those who are lonely, or high quality support people for those who need to bring. That was what was posed, and so that's, I wonder.
I love that. Good.
Of your thoughts on this.
Please.
On a parallel path up with what Shane brought up, which is, I think, you know, this, so I, you know, in terms of like job roles, what do we do? Like, I work for a chatbot company, and we've been able to consume a lot of the OpenAI technology, but the real, like, I think the perfect application is to have a constrained, like Shane was mentioning, a constrained data set where you can suddenly use conversational dialogue as a human on the other end who's wanting to query that data set, because it's easy for us to, like, as humans, like, you can ask questions back and forth and get answers, get the information you need in a much more I think, effective manner than using typical search queries and things like this. So the constrained data set application, I think is very good. And to that point, it's not the internet. It's like you kind of feed it a specific set of information and data. So
Who decides what data?
well,
That's the bias.
no,
That's the bias.
that's the bias. It's all about like, what is the data set that you're going to utilize it for? And like, I think that that's like part of like the crux of the issue is like the good applications versus those that are not. And like in, you know, even the caregiver application, it's like you would want to have a constrained way of like interfacing with somebody. It's not going to be the internet. It would be like an appropriate set of like dialogue that it would get trained on in dealing with like what's an appropriate response and not taking somebody down a dark path or whatnot. So.
Yes, please.
So back to the high quality friendships, is it a high quality friendship if it's not mutually beneficial?
Yeah. That's a good statement.
They can build that into the program.
Yes.
Well, personally, I think we're But I think the thing is we're talking about like 10 different things here. We're talking about like a utility like electricity, but then like the use cases, and it's like using it in like in wiring versus how it's used in a home, and you're like, but it should have the same rules. And I that's a big risk for me personally, because like in my world in this is a little different than I think some of you, which are using it more like aggregating data or using it in a coding way or something like that. But from a creative or visual standpoint, you kind of want something that is human. Like we're talking about, should this thing be God? Like, should this thing know all, be totally unbiased, be able to tell you, yes, this is right, this is wrong, but that's not who humans are, and that's not what we're training it on. And that's kind of where it comes into the epistemology of it, as like, is where what is the use case here? Because in my world, like I can prompt it right now and I can ask it, okay, I want a script. I want an idea for a script or a movie or something like that, that includes these values or these human conditions. And if it's coming at me and being like, well, actually that human condition is based on a bias that is not real, then it's not reflecting our own experience in real life. So in some aspects, I think those things are necessary and has to be trained in it if we're using it in a use case where it needs to represent real life and real use cases that we're going to use in real life as humans. There's also cases where you want a very refined data set and you want a yes or no answer that is going to be 100% unbiased and accurate. And so I don't think there's as much worry. Like, yeah, you can utilize one data set to completely cheat in some ways. And that's what we're seeing right now with a lot of students. Going back to that earlier point, is people using this technology to get ahead when they don't have the core knowledge that it represents. So people using it to write essays or cheat on tests or any of that stuff. But like going back, we had Spark Notes when I was in high school. We had Google was just starting, and we were talking about this earlier, where we used the internet to cheat all the time in high school. Like we're utilizing tools because we're human, and humans naturally want to find the fastest path and the most like the use. Yeah, exactly. Least resistance. And so we're creating something that is us, and then we're hating on it because it looks like us. And I think that's the human condition, right? So
I'd like to throw one other comment out there, and that is that, oh, go ahead, Dan. The future or the past is not predictive of the future. And so when you, well, maybe not. Now, chat, for example, is 2 years out of date. You ask it about Ukraine, it'll tell you that it's a country, you know, adjoining Russia, and won't have anything about the last 2 years of war. Huh?
Well, beyond 2019.
Well, it right now, I believe the cutoff on it was what, September of 2021. So this is 2023, so it's ignorant of the last 2 years. And that's not likely to change because someone had to go through and pull out that database and try to figure out how to balance what we as humans can't balance ourselves. So Lindsay, you had,
So I'm a software engineer and I have not dove into the AI as part of work yet because I feel like I have one main reservation. So where do you draw the line between I used AI as a tool, but I did it versus I let AI do it for me? Here it is.
It's a credit for.
Yeah. So
well,
I find that very interesting because especially when you're using it for work, where do you draw that line between, oh, hey, AI did my job for me today versus I use it as a tool for my job today?
If you like one, job, you're the ultimate arbiter of your work.
Something's a better.
when-
I was gonna
So
say,
that-
because developers still code like all the time. It's hard and jokes, you know, there's a big stigma about not stealing these sorts of things, right? So just going to what you're saying. It's perfectly fine for developers. For other things, it's not.
Okay, but a lot of automation, like we look at automation as being a physical thing, and it's like if you're using a what do they call it, to mill wheat or whatever, like a big machine to do some agricultural work. I'm not a farmer, sorry. But it's if you were to take that same thing and be like, oh, that was someone's code physically created, and now it's automating that work over and over. Like, can they take credit for milling that entire field if they didn't do it by hand? Like, it's aiding in the process of.
how many people in here classify themselves as an artist? Okay. AI is based on stealing your work. Go ahead, talk. No, I mean, it creates derivative work, which is a
Write
huge.
songs, so I've been using it to write lyrics for songs, and they all rhyme, and they are.
And who owns them? The person who wrote it, that it was based on, or you because you asked for
You
it?
know, it's not my profession, so I can write the song and I don't have to worry about being paid for it, right? But that is the problem, is it is gonna.
Pop music is derivative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Today, it all sounds very similar.
There are so many people that would like to read Google's code. I mean, it really is that type of question. There's who owns what was created. You built that based on someone else's work. You know, in school, they would call that plagiarism.
Well, then,
Right.
I know it's doing all of my. Like, all the essays and all those my creative outlets.
Since you use Apple software, then you own it?
No, they own it because I use their computer. Hey, as we're getting now to the way we wrap up and we continue this conversation is I prefer that I would like that the experts that we invited to sort of have a last word.
Yep.
And then they've been listening to our banter about, I think we identified that if we're doing this over again, you really have to isolate the topics because it's too far reaching, like art and, you know, science, like what you said, art and coding is just, there's very different ends of the spectrum and you can't really.
We need to have more meetings.
So anyway, all right. So,
Find topic.
really quick, can I just do one quick thing? So if we had, like, let's say, if we wanted to do some real laws in this country, who would want to know or make it a law that anything generated using like generated AI has to be labeled that way?
Like GMOs.
Yeah.
Totally.
Like, show of hands, who would want that? Right. For an image or a video.
What's my use?
But this is one, how we let.
So show of hands. What about
No, okay. What about having, what about having? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Okay, experts have the last word.
We would love for you to chime in with your last words based on this conversation, which will never end. You can probably have these conversations for the next 80 hours anyway. Bad.
I've really enjoyed this. It's so interesting to hear the many different perspectives in the room. I'm delighted by how much thought that people are putting into this topic. You know, I've been studying it for a fairly long time, and I had made an assumption that, you know, people weren't all that far along on it, but I've been now to several events, and I'm really impressed that people are taking the time to study it, to think about it, to talk about it, because that's what has to happen. The one piece of advice I would, you know, toss out there as a sort of concluding remark in an article I just had in Publishers Weekly last week, you know, my advice to people was, yeah, you know, again, the threats are real, but try and separate those into a separate pot from the opportunities. Because if you know, you can't perceive the opportunities, and they are real. There are real opportunities here. But if you're mixing in your head the threats and the opportunities all at the same time, you won't see either side clearly. So spend time to separately say, okay, what are all the good things that could come from all of this, and go down that road without fear. And then, you know, tomorrow to spend the day thinking, okay, what are all the bad things that can come through as a result of this? And that, you know, I'm not advocating not doing that. It's just separate those out so that you have a clearer sense of each. Don't conflate them. Don't mix them all together. Take the time to go way down the road on either side of the road. That's that's it. Thank you for having me here. It's good. I can't.
So I wanted to just, in thinking about the wide circumference of issues that folks brought up, really just add a thought about values and the importance of thinking about what kind of values we want our technologies to be animated by, and what kinds of values those technologies will add to or develop or push further, and what they might limit in terms of our ability to be truly human. When I talk about ethics with my students, I very rarely say, here is the singular value that we should build toward or hold up. Usually when we're talking about ethics, we're talking about competing values in a hierarchy of values. How do we balance out love and care? How do we balance out efficiency and care? How do we balance out human rights versus national protections? Those are all questions, I think, of how we want to assess and understand values. I'm very saddened sometimes to see that our technological developments are governed by and pushed toward a single value, oftentimes of profit. The technologies that we get are oftentimes not the technologies we need or that would make our world a better place. They're the ones that are most profitable. That's not the same thing. So when we ask ourselves what a good technology is, do we want to ask ourselves which technologies are profitable, which technologies are efficient, which technologies add to care, which technologies elevate and amplify love? I think that those are important questions. I'll end with a very brief anecdote, which is to say that when I ask my students about whether or not they want the most efficient technologies, oftentimes they'll say yes. And I said, well, what if that technology is developing, for example, the abilities of a caregiver or the opportunities for somebody to be loved? I say to them sometimes, how many of you have heard of a product called Soylent? And most of them raise their hands. It's a nutritional delivery system that's very efficient. The engineer made it. Engineering tries to make things more efficient. But we all know that we don't just eat because we want something efficient. We eat because there is gustatory pleasure, or that we have a loved one, we want to make them a 4-course meal for their birthday, or because we have a recipe that our grandmother handed down to us from generations is the only thing that she was able to take from her, the country that she fled. And she makes that recipe a reminder of the place that she lost. And we don't do any of those things because they're efficient. We do them because of love and care. If a technology makes something more efficient, it does not follow that it also provides more love or more care. Oftentimes, love and care is orthogonal or asymmetric to things like efficiency. When we talk about caregiving, when we talk about technologies that make us feel less lonely, I'm not convinced that a technology might do that. I don't know that a techno solution might do that. I do think that there are some technological solutions that we build toward, and my hope is that we build toward the diversity of human values, and that we keep, before we adopt technology, in mind what kind of society we want to have, and whether or not that kind of technology brings us toward or further away from that kind of society.
Kevin, do you want to say anything? I'm sorry, I didn't do that yet.
You good? That was in order. I guess I'll just talk to that last point we were talking about before we opened up the experts, that about content ownership, just because that kind of falls into my realm a little bit. And I think we see that a lot with, I mean, we've seen that over the years. From Kubrick saying every idea and every film's already been made, and now it's just an amalgamation of every idea that's already come before us. And that's been said by other people before, but we keep seeing innovation in that realm. And we see other artists, like was the recent thing with Ed Sheeran lifting a bunch of chord progressions. And we've seen that with every band. Chord progressions there's some that sound good to the human ear, and they're replicated, and eventually you get the same exact song from a different artist 20 years later. And I think we're just in a different world now, where these creative works and these unique works are now a resource that we're going to keep using and combining in different ways. So to give you a case study, so one thing that I'm using today in the real world is a lot of this for generative text for my works. Brad and I were talking about this at the last film event we were at, that it's great for writing descriptions of things. It's great for creating things in different ways that are, I think I said this earlier, you're going to resonate with your audience a little better. And it helps iterate and ideate a lot quicker in a lot of those ways. And sometimes it is going to pull in sources that are so alike or replicated of other sources that people are going to say, hey, that looks like that. But how many movies do we have that come out each year that are like the same movie, and they came out the same year by totally different directors, totally different studios? So I'm not as much worried about that side of things. And had another point, but I've kind of lost this point.
Let me piggyback on that. So at a writers' conference a few years ago, there was a best-selling author who was teaching all of us. And I asked him, so how did you really get good at your craft? At the very beginning. He said he went out and bought like 4 bestsellers, and he rewrote the books word for word. He transcribed the entire bestsellers until it became deep into his psyche, and he wound up writing the bestseller. So how is this technology any different than someone who does that? And I think that a lot of artists emulate, and then they start to create something unique. And you could even say that with musicians, right? They start playing cover songs. It's not until Sting even admitted that the way he writes his music is he'll listen to a song he really likes, then he starts like noodling on it until you can't even recognize where it came from. But he admits that he didn't come up with the original seed, the idea. He gives credit to, he never says who it is because he's himself in court, but I think you're making good points. Like, there is nothing original anymore. Anyone who claims to have an original idea is full of shit.
Well, yeah, I think it's an intersection right now we have with this prior America that was very built on, okay, what can make me money? What can we build profit off of? And now these things are there that are able to do the same things without needing to charge people for it necessarily. I mean, sure, there's server space and the processing power and all that, but it's something that, it is infinitely creative. And sorry, something you said just spurred it and I lost it for a second.
Like the first one to do something new and novel, like other cultures, like
Yeah, and tell stories. That is our whole, that's how humans progressed, is telling the same stories over time. And yeah. Well,
You know, Brian asked, how is this different? I think it's faster.
It puts the same power in the hands of the masses. That's really what's happening.
And with regard to the art part, I think we will see more possible to see more original pieces. And I've been on a few debates on this. And usually people don't like what I have to say here, is that AI is the brush. I'm not trained in how to paint. I'm not trained in how to work to use the pen. But I still have ideas in my head, dreams, visions that I'd love to put on canvas. I don't have that ability that someone who's taken a wonderful amount of time and years to do that. But now with AI, I can work with it, talk to it, back and forth, and get that out. And it feels good to be, and I'm a programmer by trade, and I have those skills. I know people that would love to write code and programming, but they can't. Now they can sit there, take AI and get their code out. So now I do believe it will borrow from what it's found on the internet. And I don't like this necessarily that it's like, well, this looks like it was inspired by Nagel or some other, that's not really cool. I agree that that's kind of like taking someone else's work. But all of us have art and dreams inside our head, and we'd like to put on canvas. I just don't have the ability to do that with a pen or a brush. AI is the pathway, it's my brush. So yeah,
So use it like an issue. I like it.
One last thing, just on that case. So that's something we actually do in a lot of pitch meetings I have with clients, business owners. Once we define the story that we're going to tell in a video or an experience or anything, we present them with a bunch of styles. We show them works from other people to try to rein in what their idea of that concept is. And we're showing them like it's got watermarks on it because we just want to get a sense of what that client wants and refine it down. And now we're able to do that in the room with them. We're able to ideate with them instantly and say, oh, you don't like that style. Okay, well, what other artists do you like? Or what other things are you looking for? Like a brush. Yeah, exactly. Like a brush. And it's enabling people all over, independent creators. I mean, I often work alone in my company. I hire contractors in, but I often am working alone, and it's extending my abilities to things that didn't necessarily exist before. People that aren't in the art community at all. We were talking earlier, me and Richie were talking, and he was saying that like he would love to build 3D objects in certain ways, but now you can really type something in and it will generate a 3D object and you can implement it even if you have no content creation background at all. So yeah.
All right, final word.
So I have a little bit of a counter to all of that actually, which comes from my background is was trained in college as a musician, and something that as somebody that spent their basically full life training a very rote skill, and then on the internet now there's all these videos with these recording technologies and how-tos of like, here's how you can take this one chord and then expand it out to sound like somebody that actually knows how to do it. And so as somebody that's kind of dedicated their life to a craft, and then to see that ability sort of just like now anybody can have it for free, there is very much this sort of feeling of like, well, that really sort of degrades and cheapens everything that I've practiced to do. And so it's an interesting thing because while I also am really thrilled that people have more access to make ideas, the consideration that I think about is that if society is moving more and more towards an area where the bar for doing something means that you don't have to have a skill, then where is the corpus of people that are sort of carrying that torch of like, I mean, back in the day, there weren't like really fancy recording arts technologies and stuff. All of the harmonies that you heard were singers that spent their entire life training to hit that pitch. And so it does make me think about like, if the need to have skill starts to go away, it's like, as where are the sort of masters of the craft that people have to look up to and aspire to? So it's kind of, it's sort of not to say one or the other, but it is, I think, really interesting to highlight both sides of both lowering the bar of creative skill so that people can create versus almost like, hey, if you want to learn to be, you know, a carpenter, like find somebody to become a disciple of kind of thing. So I don't know, it's interesting. Yeah.
Just one comment, wouldn't that bring performance, real life performance, value way up in the future.
I think so.
Where, you know, people are going to say, okay, generate all this stuff digitally,
Yeah.
but I want to go see the human experience that gives me that. And so therefore that becomes more.
We're not going to get through this whole conversation tonight. And I would kind of like to close this out with what I hope is happening here is that people are connecting to other people. You're seeing the other thought processes and that kind of stuff. And so if the connections that you create at a soft tech event can evolve into relationships that can then pursue these ideas, that sets the stage for our community to be more successful in the future. AI be damned.
All right. Thank you.